he has nasty attacks. So we've got to strike the balance between the public interest and being fair to the person who's in power. But a man who's earning well over $1 million a year, with 1.8 maybe took a reduction, is entitled to be asked questions. And there isn't anything nasty in my attitude towards him, or most people's. But there is an element in the press, Liam. We know who they are, and they know who they are. And I think the people generally know who they are.
I think all those questions that Liam you mentioned there, I think they're all relevant. I think they're all pertinent to what's gone on.
I didn't say they weren't.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you're suggesting it's an agenda, that there's other motives to ask those. I think you would ask those questions.
No, I'll tell you what happens, Richie. They all get together when they're away, and they'll say, okay, what difficult questions can we ask them? They all agree, and then that's how they attack.
That's fair, Liam.
No, hang on.
No, I don't think that's fair.
You don't think that's fair?
You don't believe that an appropriate line of questioning to Trapattoni in this evening's press conference, which we believe is going on any minute now, would be to ask him to clarify his comments this morning.
Yeah.
And I think you wait for...
No, the interpretation of the press comments.
But it's a fair...
They need that clarified. They've interpreted that he's criticising his players. I don't think he has, and I gave you the reason why, because I know the man.
Yeah.
And I think if Didi Hamann was sitting here, he'd probably say the same thing. So we know the guy, and he's not that type of person.
I think it's wrong.
If they've interpreted, because that's the way to get at him.
No.
I think you could interpret it as criticism of the players, because it's possibly criticism of the players. Not because you want a Trapattoni out campaign to be started, or because you're overreacting to last night. I think it's right to ask the manager, or to maybe interpret this. The problem with Trapattoni is...
Yeah, can you clarify your comments? Are you being critical of the players? And what if he says, no, I wasn't. I just find it hard to understand why we made such silly mistakes.
But most of what he says, and I've been to one press conference that Trapattoni's held, it's so hard to understand what he's saying. I know he's this figure that he's done a huge amount of the game, and a lot of people have a lot of respect for him for right reasons. But he's near impossible to understand some days.
But some days, not all days, Richie. And you know, like when, I suppose to change the mood, when things are going extremely well, most people can understand everything extremely well. But when things do become difficult, of course, there are elements where it gets lost in translation. The same thing happened with Capello in England. And, you know, there was a comment at the time, or his English is better than Trapattoni. So I know where you're coming from, but that works both ways, you know, and there are days when it was better and worse.
Richie's core point is absolutely spot on. He is, given that the comments he made, they're open to interpretation. To clarify what he meant is a fair question. Wouldn't you agree, Liam?
Yeah.
Right. And
because he's going to get criticised if he lets it continue. But if he turns around and says, no, not at all, I've never criticised my players and any the jobs I've been in, what will the press say then?
Well, I'll tell you.
Will they back off?
Well, I'll tell you what. First of all, the idea that they get together is not right, because no, hold on.
No, listen, I've been part of that too, and I don't think that's fair.
I didn't get together
opinion
with anybody.
No, you didn't, Eamon. That's probably why you're still going so strong and you're still as prominent as you are, because you have your own way of thinking.
Yeah, but I don't think. See,
What about their editors? Will they be putting some pressure on?
Yes, yes. Editors do put pressure on journalists to come up with stories, and to come up with hot stories, if you like. And I hear what you're saying.
Or nasty stories.
Well, I'm just going to address that. I hear what you're saying, that there is a feral, predatory element that is in the media. But they have to counterbalance that with, and I think we can prove it by footage we have. You saw Giovanni Trapattoni and Marco Tardelli walking down the street in Gdansk the other night, surrounded by Irish people, applauding them, chanting his name, giving him, the respect and affection that, in general, the people of this country have for most people, foreigners. And they're wonderful people. And we have footage of this, how generous the Irish people have been to him, how welcoming. And I think he appreciates that, Now, at the same time, those people aren't to be taken for fools, or their passion to be taken for granted. And responsible journalists, or even controversial journalists, will challenge the prevailing wisdom. And the prevailing wisdom of Trapattoni is he's liked and respected. He's charismatic. I like him. I mean, I met him once.
Indeed.
And I said, I'd go and introduce myself, and I said to him, Mr. Trapattoni, it's a pleasure to meet you. You won't know me, but I know you. He's a man from television. But the thing is, the point wasn't that. He was charming. And I'm sure he's a good man, a charming man. But he's in a powerful position.
Indeed, but if
he needs to manipulate public opinion.
And if Giovanni, well, I don't know about manipulating public opinion, but if Giovanni, if Trapattoni gave the response that Liam gave you there about, no, I didn't, the response to the question, if he says, look, I didn't blame the players, I wasn't critical of them, if he gives that response, would you be happy with that?
What he said was, I can't understand why our players made the mistakes they made in these 2 matches. They haven't made them before. He said, I think it's the pressure and tension that they feel, and the weight is too much on their shoulders. That's verbatim what he said. Now, you can interpret that 2 ways. An honest answer and his real feelings, or a shifting of blame away from him and the spotlight away from his team selection of Cox and Walters and other people perhaps away. Now, you can interpret it. I'm not saying it's not a done deal. It's open to interpretation. It's the opportunity to clarify, which is what Richie rightly called for.
I think if the line of questioning, Liam's point earlier, you said if it gets particularly nasty, it'll be about whether his contract is right, that he should serve the next 2 years. I think that's an appropriate direction for this line of questioning to go. I think it would reflect.
No, I didn't say that at all.
Well, I think.
I didn't say that at all.
No, I think you
get what I said right. I said it'll be questioned as the amount of money he's getting.
And
that's
you don't
what
think
I said.
That's a relevant question. I think you're suggesting
well, no,
that questions
it's not
are being asked.
relevant. No, I don't think it's relevant at all. If you look at the amount of money Trapattoni's earned, do you think the FAI have had it back? I don't know, but do you think the FAI had it back?
I think the question as to whether.
Do you think the FAI have had it back?
Was it 8 million? What's the?
Capello or something.
Yeah, I don't think.
I think this is a football. I think this is a footballing issue.
Well, don't bring money into it then.
You mentioned money.
No,
you mentioned
me. I raised the subject. Yeah, well, I raised the subject in this context that he is a powerful man, the most powerful man in Irish soccer in a way, in terms of our national team. He is highly paid and part of and he's the second highest paid manager, I think, in Europe after the English manager. Now, part of that, what goes with the territory there is you must be responsive to the people who are paying your wages, and the people effectively paying his wages. Half is being paid by Dennis O'Brien, we understand, and
responsive in what way? I mean, answering questions.
Answering questions, but only reasonable questions.
Yeah,
you know, and
he's always answered questions.
He has, yeah, only reasonable questions. But I don't think that we are guilty of setting up an agenda or nastiness. There's nothing nasty.
I didn't say you were.
No. I think
I'm talking about the paper this morning. The headline is Trapp turns on his Ireland flops as Euro dream ends. I don't see his comments as being anything of the sort.
Well, that's an interpretation. That's the point. I think his comments,
well, you see that,
because they're so loose at times, they're open to interpretation now. I think these were come through an interpreter. What language did he say this in? Is this an interpreter from UEFA, or was it Pidgin English?
It would be, I think Manuela Spinelli is his interpreter at all the FAI events that he speaks at, press conferences, training sessions, etc. So, well, we don't know where exactly those comments came.
Those comments were something that we would say.
Liam.
We would say, I don't understand why we're losing goals like this.
Yeah. Liam, you were in Italy, Liam.